I am live. I stopped in the middle of a chapter yesterday because of the battery, so I made sure it's full. I'm reading out of Life as Carola. It says here is an unusual book that shines with fire, according to the New York Times. It plays in the 16th century, and it is a life of Joan Grant, who was a writer of her far memories. She died in 1989. Carola was born on the 4th of May, 1510. She's now about 20 or so, and she is in a convent. And she's had quite adventures. Sad things happened to her. And this chapter was entitled Carola di Ludovici. It is her wedding day. His gift was a pendant, the work of a master goldsmith. It was of 3 keys, their halves fashioned into fantastic animals. A hippogriff, his body a pearl, his outspread wings enamel, a white heart in rock crystal with an emerald collar, a zebra striped in gold and silver with ruby eyes. Carlos smiled at my pleasure, saying, "When you wear this, I shall see not 3 keys, but 5, for among them are 2 others, the key of my heart and the key of heaven, which you have opened for me." I tried not to show how deeply I was moved. I must grow serious to carry so weighty an authority. As he fastened the jeweled chain around my neck, he said, "To me you are the authority for all truth that lies concealed behind this transient world of unrealities." The priest who performed the marriage had been brought secretly to the house, for Carlos still feared my betrayal to the papal authority. He was an old man, but without the nobility of age, and I wondered what he would think of if he knew that I was a proclaimed heretic. He hurried through the ceremonial words, eager to take the gold he had been promised for his journey from Lombardy, eager to be on the road again. The candles were resonant as music before the tall windows. It seemed that the vows which Carlos made to me were not a betrothal, but a benediction. I knew that he had asked me to marry him only because he was old, and feared to leave me without the protection of his name. My life had well prepared me for this strange marriage. I had seen only the bitterness of the love that unites men and women, my mother's tears and Lucia's despair, and so I was content to receive peace at his hands, and in return I gave him the love I would have given the father I had longed for, but never known. The door closed noiselessly behind the shuffling priest. The marriage ring was heavy on my finger. I was Carola di Ludovici, mistress of a great house with servants at my bidding, and lands and gold as the walls against the world. Yet it seemed that a chill draught crept through the room, bringing the memory of other bridals that had been warm and close. There must be no regret in my heart. Carlos cannot bring me joy, but there is no sorrow in his gift. Here I shall train my spirit, and in the past I may find those things for which I now am lonely. When I talk to him of the things of my heart, he is not afraid of me. He is a great scholar, and has spent his life with venerable philosophies. Now he finds them kindled with my memory, so that their truths are no longer obscured by words, but live on the vellum as if a knowledgeable voice had spoken them. A thread of music plucked the silence and was joined by other echoes weaving a shining pattern. All senses were bemused save hearing. It was far away, yet was I one with it, as was that Antony who heard those coloured shafts in the cathedral, where the light still burned. O rare celestial melody! The sound of pennants streaming in clear air and singing swords with their brave drama sense, the silver call of curlews through the mist, the ripple of light on rustling summer leaves. These did I hear, most memorable sounds the measured chords of the long autumn dusk, the small precise note of a drop of rain, the slow surge music of a growing tree, and the harmonic of an opening bud. Then far across the chasm of the years I heard the voices of forgotten friends, music that had been plucked from strings long dust, by hands whose bones are scattered on the wind, but which still live when memory's warm blood shall into life, when memory's warm blood shall into life their muted pulses stir. The voice of Carlos brought me back into the present, seemingly very loud in the silence of the vanished music. The banqueting room is impatient to see the new bride of the Ludovicis. Tonight it shares your youth and forgets my age, which has kept it closed for more than 30 years. His velvet sleeve was smooth under my fingers as he led me down the great staircase. The shallow steps were wide enough for 5 to walk abreast, and the marble balustrade was fretted into patterns more intricate than the leading in a cathedral window. The double doors that opened into the banqueting room were richly gilded, each divided into 15 panels carved in high relief. I sat at the head of the table and Carlos at the foot. I was almost bewildered by the unexpected magnificence. The room was hung with Spanish leather in faded green and gilt, and the floor, a marquetry of foreign woods, shone brilliantly as steel. The 40 high-backed chairs covered in cut velvet out of Venice that ranged the walls seemed like the servitors who had attended the household in the days before Anna and Katerina the cook, and the old steward were the only occupants of the kitchen quarters. 6 candelabra, each holding 4 candles of fine wax, which smelt of roses as they burned, lit crystal and silver dishes, bright with fruit, and down the long table was a cloth of living flowers, all damask white. We began the meal in great formality. I sipped rare wines and tasted every course to please Katerina, who peeped in through the door to smile at me. But when I had eaten of the carp, her favourite dish, stuffed with dried quince and costly spices, I went and sat by Carlos. I said, "I have been Donna di Ludovici. Did I play her role becomingly? Now let me be Carola a little while, for I am unused to so much dignity." In answer he raised his goblet in a toast. "I drink to Carola, who honours Ludovici." We have been over-solemn. Let us be children and play at fancies. We will pretend that all those empty chairs are drawn up to the table. Now, how shall we people them? In that one over there is a Cardinal of Milan. He thinks himself a great dignitary, but you and I know that he is only a fat man with an uneasy stomach from eating too greedily of Caterina's carp. See, beside him is the wife of that Conte from Lombardy. She is a most successful courtesan, if gossip is to be believed, but the Cardinal will not hear of her adventures, to his embarrassment, until tomorrow. How innocuous he becomes at her flattery. How unctuous he becomes at her flattery. Carlos caught the spirit of the game. That old greybeard is a famous philosopher. He expounds his views as though they were as factual as the rising sun. Poor ancient, he little knows that before the meal is over you will have confounded all his beliefs and shown him truth to his discomfiture. Who is that youth who gazes so intently at the girl across the table? A poet, but he only feigns to look at the Duke's daughter to keep his eyes from being bold when they meet yours. The anguish in his face comes from the recognition that, though his verses can well praise the moon, of you they are unworthy. I laughed. It seems we have a melancholy company. How do we fail in hospitality? We give them jealousy as gall to every dish, for they must see their host and his young bride are so engrossed together that they seem to dine apart. And so in ghostly company I drank my bridal toast. Chapter 22. The Ark. In alcoves on each side of a narrow room, whose barrel-vaulted ceiling was painted with a dice pattern in white and terracotta, there were 12 statues standing on plinths of black marble. While Carlos was showing them to me, he said, "In my youth I made 2 journeys to Greece, once called the Land of 1,000 Islands, and it was from there that I brought back 5 of these statues. This one is Mars, their god of warriors. This is Jupiter, the wise. This, the winged Mercury, who brought messages from Olympus to men whom the gods found worthy of receiving news of their august presence. The Greeks flourished even before the forerunners of our own country, and I think that if you had lived in their time, you would have found that many things which are familiar to you would not have been foreign to their understanding." His words reminded me of a dream I had often as a child, and I said, "I think I did live here. I can only remember fragments of that life, but I know I was a boy, training to be an athlete. I used to race with 6 other boys along a narrow strip of white sand between a rocky hillside and the sea. We were taught how to temper our muscles as a sword maker tempers his blades into fine steel. Sometimes we used to fling discs of hard pottery or of metal to a great distance. You must have been training for the Olympic Games. We know through the immortality of statues that they used to throw a discus, such as you describe. Can you remember more?" "No, I have forgotten how to remember at will. Perhaps one day I shall dream true of this time and be able to tell you. Did the Greeks train their will as well as their bodies? Had they wise priests? From what I know of them, through their writings, it seems that they had forgotten their wisdom, as have the Christians. It is known they silenced the voice of one of their greatest men with hemlock." "What did he try to teach?" "What you are teaching me. All who are truly wise must say the same thing when they speak of that which is changeless, though they use their own parables, for there are no pagans or heretics, but only wise men and fools. Did the priests of our church ever possess some inward knowledge, or did they always say, 'You must have faith,' not because they thought the mysteries beyond man's comprehension, but because they dared not open the eyes of their spirit, fearing that if they did so, they would know themselves blind? I think if they had the courage to search their hearts, they would find a greater fear, even that, the fear of seeing nothing, not because of their own blindness, but because the sun and the moon were the only light in the universe, the fear of finding that the darkness of their own ignorance encompassed all mankind, and that there was no wisdom and no truth. When Lucia was hungry, she found more satisfaction in buying a candle to set before the statue of a saint than if she bought bread and meat for herself. Yet, when I tried to talk to her of her beliefs, she refused to listen. What is the value of faith when one who holds it fears that it could be destroyed by words? How did you find that certainty which needs no faith? I was born with some inward knowledge. I feel that it was my heritage to be wise in my spirit, and that from some old action of mine, which my tarnished memory cannot recapture, I am shut off from my own wisdom. Yet the little knowledge that I now have is too strong for anything to destroy. You, my husband, are a great scholar, and can read what men have written in many tongues. You tell me there are days in the traditions of men when my own knowledge would have been accepted, not as strange hearsay, but as a fact, changeless as the stars. I can remember, although my vision is troubled by my earth thoughts, like a reflection in a windy pool, a time when priests were men of wisdom. They wore white robes and knew of many gods. They called on them by name, standing upright in truth with their hands upstretched to the source of light. They would have known me for one who tried to follow in their path, though I but glimpsed what to them was clear vision, and they would have helped me to wear my body lightly, so that my spirit could shine forth to kindle a light in others. The nuns seem to hate their bodies. They believe that God created earth and yet behave as if they were the work of the devil. They have distorted their teaching into a legend kept in a casket of hatred. They have forgotten that God created man and woman to comfort each other through the loneliness of earth. Decreed they should bear their children, conceived of the love of their spirit and brought forth into flesh, just as he clothed the spirit of man to walk on earth and gain that experience through which alone can come the return into his perfection. As the weeks passed, it seemed as though I had gone back to that scene interlude when my father loved us. From Carlos I received all that Orlanzo had never given me. There was a peace in his house and kindliness in his eyes. He thought in 1,000 ways to bring me happiness, as a father brings toys to enchant his child. I saw stone masons working in the corner of the courtyard, and on asking what they did, Carlos smiled and said it was a secret. They built a dovecot, and soon the air was drowsy with slow sound. I used to scatter grain for my white doves, and soon they grew so tame they would perch on my outstretched hand and let me smooth their feathers with my cheek. One was so bold he would fly into my room and strut on the sill, nodding his head as if in agreement with his weighty thoughts. In our garden there were rare flowering shrubs. One, a gardenia, came from beyond the eastern seas. I loved white flowers and those with heavy scent, the tuberoses and sweet hyacinths. Beyond the lawn there grew a mulberry tree. I would lie beneath it, quiet in its branches' shade, and watch its leaves make with the sky cerulean marquetry. Sometimes I pretended that Carlos was my child, and I would feign to scold him for sitting too long over his manuscripts. I would bring 2 crystal goblets set on silver stems and a jug of wine drawn from the casks that had come here from famous vineyards, and we would drink together and smile. Once he said to me, "I think, my Carola, you're born out of time. I see you dancing to Arcadian pipes on pastoral hills. You are so many women, and all most dear to me. Your spirit circles from the pigeon cot of this small earth, knowing the sky is for its true element. From your far flights you come back to the ark I built for you, and in your mouth bring hope to comfort me. So many pictures are there in my heart of you. I see you as a boy racing the singing waves on Grecian shores. It was your swiftness their sculptors tried to carve, your eyes that laughed, your voice that spoke to them of golden lands beyond their little sight. The boy, the nymph, the winged messenger, which will I most remember as my love? You came as sunlight to a darkened room, and lit the gilding on my manuscripts. I had been deaf until I heard your lute, insentient till I felt you clasp my hand, blind till I saw you. I was so old and weary with my years. With shuttered windows I live in a cold house, surrounded by treasures. I had brought from other lands treasures that stood to mock me now. My youth had vanished. I had searched long to find philosophy that beat with living blood, but my books burned musty incense to dead gods. I was alone and useless and afraid. Then I, who hear nothing beyond mortal sound, was sitting musing on the flying sparks, when suddenly it seemed I heard, "Open the door." I knew it was the door into the street. There were you, lying, and at once I knew you had come home to me. I saw you open your eyes and smile. "Call me a name," you said, had once been mine, and then I knew the poets had not lied. There is one Carola you have forgotten, the heretic who might have brought you death if they had found me in your house. The dying Carola. You have heard my hearsay as truth, made me forget my scars, and built for me a temple whose walls are love. How shall I tell you of my gratitude? Does the cliff thank the seas that wash her feet? Does a bird thank the air that feels its wings? Does a star thank the pilot who sets his course by it? It seemed I heard an echo of his voice down through the years from some forgotten past. The goddess of truth in her celestial sphere walks naked in beauty, and I knew that the link between us was woven of the texture of words. I said, "Once I went on a far journey and looked through the gates of heaven and into the 7 hells. It seemed that my body had died, but it was not dead. I knew that manifold terrors lay in wait for me, wherein I must be alone. When I returned from that dark journey, there was a lamp burning, and you were beside me, scribing on a clay table the words I uttered. And there was a joy in me, and a glory and a strength greater than any that I since have known. In the convent I underwent another ordeal, for less than the old one, for then the fears I had to combat were beyond pain. Again I came to you by a dark road, and I thought your door was the gate of heaven that was shut against me, but you opened it. And if God and you were 2 painters, he would grow angry with you for copying his design. So near have you made on earth his paradise." I read another chapter. The jar and the cup. Often in the winter evenings I would go with Carlos to the room where he kept his manuscripts. He sat in a chair covered with faded orange velvet, and I on a low stool by the hearth. He would read to me of the wisdom of old philosophers, changing the diversities of their tongues into the language I could understand. Often the words held little meaning for me, and I was content to listen to the sound of his voice, and watch the sparks from the blazing olive logs, like molten rain returning to heaven. But one day he read from a scroll which was said to have come from a temple built in the time of the grandfather of the Emperor Nero. Before he began, he said, "The faith of this temple was neither Christian nor pagan, and if this writing is to be believed, it followed in the tradition of a far earlier temple, which stood near to a city on the seaboard of Egypt, a city famous for its learning." Then he read, "For man tried to contemplate his own substance only when he is awake, is as though an astronomer trying to map the stars at high noon. For just as the light of the sun blinds us to the star, so do the limitations of the flesh obscure the spirit, even to the bearer thereof. Man, while he is on earth, is like him who can only see the night sky by looking at its reflection in a pool. He who would have wisdom must learn how to make of his heart a burnished mirror, so that in it he may see himself, and thus learn of his own nature. Let us consider a traveller in a desert. If he could see the stars, he would know which way he was journeying, but there is a heavy burden on his back which bends forward his head, so that he cannot look upwards, and the sands of the desert, which in the threat of my discourse are a symbol of the things of the flesh, cannot reflect the sky. Then one day he comes to a well, and in it he sees the reflection of a star. His heart is lifted up, for at last he knows with that certainty which would come to him only through his own vision, that there are stars in the heavens if he could but see them. He knows that he would see more of the sky, though the well be narrow, if it were not for the shadow cast into it by his body. Some men pass on, content to have seen a single star, but others stay by the well, and it is one of these we will consider. With his bare hands he dug at the rock, which surrounded the source of the water, and day by day, through bitter labour, he widened the well until it became a pool, calm and brilliant as a mirror. Now his shadow no longer obscured the reflection of the sky. First he saw 3 stars, then 11, and then he saw them in their ordinances, and came to understand something of the celestial design. Only then did he realize that the water on which he had laboured was the compass of his understanding, and the stars that he saw reflected therein were the light he had kindled each time he had been born into death. Strong in his vision, he continued on his journey towards that last horizon beyond which there is no dawn and no sunset. When Carlos finished the story, he would have read on, but I told him to wait, for at that moment I felt, as several times I had felt before, that I was more than Carola, and it was though on hearing 3 notes of music there had awakened in my head the theme of a ballad scored for 6 instruments, complete and perfect to the last harmonic. I said, there were times when it seemed I knew the true meaning behind the curtain of ritual with which in the convent they obscured the light. I knew that once I had upheld those very truths they tried to make me deny, and the truth came from an old strength, though how I gained it I do not know, an old wisdom, though the fullness of it I know not. Yet this I do know, there is that in each of us, 1,000 times more beautiful, more wise, more strong than we can be on earth, a part of ourselves which is beyond the limitations of flesh, and so cannot be encompassed by it, which one day, when we are at last free of this little world, we shall know to be our truest self. The fire was hot, and the flames dazzled my eyes. It seemed they lit pictures in my forehead, so that my very thoughts became luminous. I covered my eyes with my hand, yet there came not darkness, but a greater brilliance. I said, listen, and Carola will speak of what the real I knows. Long ago, men thought of that part of themselves which, though born of time, is one with eternity, as a great jar. Each time they were born into flesh, they could take from that jar only as much water as they could carry with them in a small earthen cup. With it they must refresh themselves during their day's journey, and though they drink from the cup, the water in it is not diminished. But if they do not carry the cup carefully between their hands, the water spills from it, and, soaking into the earth, is lost. At the end of their day's journey they pour that what remains back into the jar, and from a full cup will come 2 cupfuls, and from a cup that is half empty will come but a few drops. Every traveller leaves the jar of his memory with the same small cup, but there are some who on earth become potters, and for themselves on the wheel of life fashion a large vessel, and behold, it is full of water even to the brim. One who does this partakes of genius, for in him there is more of his true self than in other men. There are potters who mould a cup with 2 handles, so that from it other wayfarers may drink also. These may go into a place where a drought has fallen upon the land, where even the rocks are parched and there is no grass, and they will refresh those whom they find there with the water they carry and lead them from the torrid heat. The bearer of this cup is a true priest. Of both of them other men may say, he does not thirst as we thirst, for he was born with a gift from God, forgetting that each man must be his own potter, and he who has the larger cup has himself shaped the clay. Faster and faster whirls the potter's wheel, and the jar of the Father sees the cup of the Son growing nearer to him in his own stature. And when a man can say, the cup and the jar are 2 jars that are one, he may say also, I am the Son of God, and I and my Father are one. I heard the voice of Carlos. Is the name of your cup conscience, and of the water experience, and of the jar spirit? The water in the cup is conscience, experience, which cannot remember the source from which it came. The water in the jar is wisdom, understanding which gushed from the rock of experience, and the jar is immortality. How should this parable help us in our living? On earth we can suffer no thirst that the jar does not hold the water to quench. From prayer can grow a hollow reed to carry the water from the jar into the cup. It is well that man should remember his gods at dawn, at noonday, and at sunset, for in the memory of his gods he will remember himself. Only in the overcoming of self is the freedom from self gained. Only in the mirror of one's own heart can God be seen, and only in the voice of experience can his answer to all questions be heard. In the old years, men did not pray to God to turn them into puppets, moved his threads. They did not cry, "House me against the wind," but said, "Teach me to stretch the threads on my own loom, so that I can weave a cloak in which I may walk through the great tempest and not perish." I remember a prayer that I was taught in the long past. "Master, help me to find that within me of which I may drink, and so be refreshed to do thy work. Teach me to see thee with my eyes, so to hear thee with my ears, to speak of thee with my mouth, until my sight is thy sight, my ears thy ears, my mouth thy mouth, and I am no longer alone." If the true teaching of Jesus were remembered, in his churches would be heard, "Lead me into temptation so that I may find the strength to overcome it." And his people would know that he would not send them forth into the cold until they were ready to weave a cloak, for he tempers the wind to the shorn lamb. Then Carlos said, "It seems that you recognize your truth even behind the Christian terms, which your days in the convent might have caused you to abhor. There's only one truth, and all who speak of it must say the same thing." Then he asked me, "Is there more light in our modern teachings than I have seen, though long I searched for it in vain?" And so I came to tell Carlos of the exiles from Eden, which is the next chapter. Happy Sunday.